Okay, this will be a video about Rob Reiner's death and specifically wondering if his son, Nick Reiner, could have been the mysterious Starchild. And you might be asking yourself, well, who is Starchild? So in 2009, there was a message board thread that became really, really popular. I already did a video on it. I called it the message board thread that almost brought down Hollywood. And this message board thread was filled with people who claimed they were involved in Hollywood, who were just posting all these stories about how evil Hollywood was behind the scenes. And the whole thread is just filled with all this really eye opening stuff. It got into everything from rampant sexual abuse. There were tons of posts about how prevalent blackmail was in Hollywood. It really got into Satanism and the whole concept of selling your soul. There were a number of people who talked about how it is literally that many people in the limelight quite literally sell their souls for fame. And one of the posters, the most memorable poster in the thread, was this user who went by the handle of Starchild because he claimed he was the child of a famous Hollywood star. And he posted in detail about all this horrific stuff that he had been subjected to by his father and how he was just a total wreck because of this abuse. He's addicted to drugs, suicidal. And the whole thread is honestly just riveting. Just one of the most fascinating things I've ever read. Honestly, just as riveting as some of the best books I've read. It's all anonymous people posting to a message board thread. So some of them could be fake. There's no way to really verify if these stories are indeed true. But some of them are filled with just so much detail that it would take quite an imagination to just make this stuff up. And some of the details that emerged about Nick Reiner after these murders really seem to add up with a lot of the things that this anonymous Starchild posted about in this thread. So I do wonder if this mysterious Starchild from back in 2009 was Nick Reiner. So I'll go through a few of the things I found interesting about this whole Nick Reiner, Rob Reiner story, and also just kind of cover what Starchild talked about and the similarities between the two. And I'll start out by recapping the message board thread real quick if you're not familiar with it. Like I said, it's just totally riveting. If you've seen my other video on the message board thread and you're familiar with it, you can just go ahead and skip forward in the video. But it all began on a message board site that was really popular back in 2009. And a guy posted a message saying that he had a friend who worked for MTV. And one of the jobs that this friend did was to install hidden cameras in the house that Nick Lachey and Jessica Simpson lived in while they filmed their show Newlyweds. And these were hidden cameras. They were totally state of the art. They were all throughout the house. And this was done because MTV wanted to get blackmail material on these too. And the person posting here said that these cameras had captured just some really extremely bad things. And he did stress that it didn't necessarily involve Jessica Simpson and Nick Lachey because people were in and out of the house constantly. The house was owned by MTV. So there were a whole bunch of just other celebrities and studio executives and people like that who were in and out of the house. And the guy posting said that his friend who set up these cameras eventually felt guilty about what he'd done, so he made a copy of the footage that these cameras had captured, and he went on the run with the tapes, and he was going to attempt to release them to the public. And so this guy would provide updates about his friend who was on the run with these blackmail tapes. And people basically, responded to this, and they were like, whoa, that's, crazy that MTV would do something like that. And this guy pretty much just said, no, no, no. This is totally commonplace in Hollywood. Blackmailing stars like this happens absolutely all the time. There is so much nasty, evil stuff that goes on in Hollywood like this. And from there, a bunch of other people who claimed to be involved in Hollywood contributed to the thread. It really went viral and turned into this just absolutely massive thread of just hundreds upon hundreds of pages of other people who claimed to be involved in Hollywood, posting stories about things they'd seen, things they'd experienced, just stories about how nasty Hollywood was behind the scenes. And one of the crazy things about the thread that does lend some legitimacy to it is how a lot of the things that were talked about in this thread ended up becoming true down the road. A lot of people posted about how sick P. Diddy was in real life, and this was 15 years ago. No one really at the time suspected Diddy had any sort of like shady side to him back then. Obviously, that came true down the road. And a couple people in the thread mentioned Tiger Woods and how he was not like this squeaky clean guy that everyone thought he was. And this honestly kind of seemed ludicrous at the time because he had this totally clean cut, all American image. And then later on, obviously, there was just all these stories that came out about how Tiger Woods was involved in all this cheating and how he had this totally other life away from the public. But at the time of this message board thread, these stories about Tiger Woods were totally unknown. But of all the people who posted, there was this poster who went by the handle Starchild, and he was the most memorable person who contributed to the thread. He said that he was the son of a Hollywood star, and his father had just subjected him to all this awful stuff when he was a child. He talked about being in and out of rehab, talked about how he was suicidal. He really got into how deeply his dad was involved in with Satanism, and he made about 10 posts in the thread where he talked about all of this. I went ahead and pulled out these 10 posts, and I'll just go ahead and read them off now. And then after that, I'll get into why this has some similarities with Nick Reiner and whether this could have been him. So, again, if you've already watched my earlier video and you're familiar with this, feel free to skip forward. And so his first post here, he's just responding to someone who said that this whole thread was interesting. And Starchild says, I think so too. I am a celeb. Been in the business for years, but I just became well known in the last several. I would bet my life that this is true. Crazy shit goes on in Hollywood. The hills are full of wolves. I have been allowed to ascend the ladder because of my dad. He is involved in dark shit. This town is full of lost souls, plastic people in a make believe existence. I was also abused by my own family. I've been an addict since I was 16. I hate this place, but I cannot tell anyone and cannot leave. I have sold my soul to the evil grind. This place exists solely to lead the world to hell. Take it from someone already there. Quit following them, or you will be like me and lose your will to exist. And then someone responded to him and said, you can escape if you want to. It's not too late. And Starchild says, I wish it were that easy. Once you sign away your soul, they have it. My dad is an evil man. He would have them find me and then killed if I ever came forward and told the truth. I'm in my 20s. My dad is also a celeb. He is very well known but hasn't had real work in a while. If you all knew what is done to get back into the lights, you wouldn't believe it. Well, what is done to get into the lights, too. I have seen my dad having group sex on many occasions. I have also seen him have gay sex with men that you know of, men that you have seen on TV. You would be shocked. I hate my dad. I watched him abuse my mom so many times, but the police would never touch him. He was too rich and famous for anyone to mess with him. Also, the cops in Hollywood are mostly satanic cult members. I told a friend once about the shit that went on in my house, and I got locked in the dungeon for days. Yes, you heard me. My dad's house has a hidden basement that is basically a dungeon type underground level. It has all sorts of the most demonic shit you have ever seen, the stuff that's in movies. When I tell you that people here are effed up, I mean bad. They have all kinds of rituals down there. This is where I was first raped. My life is one that I wish had never been. I don't even want to be acting. I would far rather be an average Joe and happy than me. You want to hear something crazy and kind of sad? I have never told anyone this. I always wanted to be a park ranger. I love the outdoors and animals, and that always fascinated me. When I was younger, I told my parents that, and my dad beat me for even saying it. He said that only dropouts and misfits did stupid shit like that. That no son of his was going to throw away his name and legacy off in the woods feeding squirrels. I would trade with someone that has a job like that in less than a minute. Sad, huh? And then in another post, Starchild says, I am not afraid. To tell you the truth, I don't care. If they come and get me, they just do. I thought about suicide many times when I was a teen. I couldn't do it. I really hate all these bastards so much that I have thought about telling the whole damn world what really happens here. I figured no one would believe me. Some of my dad's best friends are very famous actors and singers, sick people. My dad's close friend has a daughter my age. She has been in his dungeon. I had to watch as a group of men blanked her. She was no more than 10 at the time. They made us do things together in front of them on many occasions. You would all know her. That is the type of wickedness you normal peeps know nothing about. Thank God that you don't. If they busted in with guns blazing right now, I wouldn't care. Maybe I could finally be free. And then in another post, he says, I know there will be people who see stuff like what I quoted and think that it is insane and a fantasy, some movie shit. Where do you think they get all those crazy ideas? I don't want to go into all that right now, though. I have seen stuff that if I told all now, no one here would believe another word I said, so I won't go there now. I know that this thread has indeed gone viral in the young Hollywood groups. They are talking about it and telling everybody they know about it. And then someone posted like, "Well, why isn't anyone getting arrested? Why hasn't anything happened yet?" And Starchild says, "It's not as simple as you make it sound. These people like me have been mind controlled to the nth degree. It is easy for you to say what you do, but you must understand that it's ones in the biz that are afraid. This is no joke. This is no game. This is controlled by darkness that is pitch black, wicked that will stop at nothing to kill whoever may bring exposure to their game. I had a bout of paranoia overtake me this past week. That is why I ducked out for days from this thread. I thought about the fact that some here have said that if I don't come forward, I will be aiding the cause of this evil. I also thought about the fact of how much I hate all these devil filled bastards. I am here now because of what some of you said. If they find out who I am and come give me a visit, so be it." And then someone else posted here about this Kanye West video that came out around this time that kind of had like this demonic messaging, it seemed like. And then Starchild gets into the whole concept of demonic possession. And he says, "It's not trying to say anything, it's saying it. He's full of them. One too many. They all want to be inside who is on top. They want to be inside who is in the limelight. They run like a bitch when that person is outcast. All of the famous ones eventually get too old and haggard for their use. They leave. When they do, all that's left is a mangled soul and a wrecked body. Look at even the greatest. Dean Martin was a delusional walking skeleton. One example. You can rattle off thousands more. They were like Kanye, one too many demons." And then someone else posted in response to that message, he said, "So you're saying the demons pile onto or pile into the current hot stars and then jump out when that star is all used up?" And Starchild responded, "That is exactly what I am saying. You believe it or not. The ones at the very top are no longer just that person that got there. Never. They are full of alters. That is the fancy name for demons. They are fragmented into compartments that each have their own special traits." And then somebody posted a long post about people selling their souls and demons coming to fruition on planet Earth. And Starchild said, "I promise I am not trying to be an ass when I say what I'm about to. I'm not trying to say you're wrong, because I'm as far from an expert as there is, except when it comes to things of Satan. That I know all too well. Where you are wrong is that you feel like they are coming to take us. They are here. They have been here for a long time. They are trapped here. They have been inside most of the top of Hollywood you have paid to watch. You are actually watching more than the star. They already have most of our souls. We are fighting to get them back. I know that I am." And then a little later, Starchild posted again. He said, "I have some real news for you. A couple things, actually. First, they have cut Ashley Simpson from Melrose Place. They did this abruptly. I had a bud tell me that her and her family were told about this thread and that Joe listened to the calls that were made to his office. Now, all of a sudden, Ashley is leaving a primetime show, which many would kill to be on. He said that she left, that they didn't cut her. He and I found it a little bit too coincidental that this thread comes out and then she decides to bolt from the limelight. The other thing that is spreading around these parts is that a death threat was made to a top actress just this past week because she told friends that she was going to talk just as Mackenzie Phillips did. They evidently threatened to kill even her 9-year-old cousin. They took a pic of one of their goons standing behind her cousin outside of a mall entrance holding a pistol over the little girl's head. This guy was half covering his face and standing just behind the girl, so she never knew he was behind her or doing this. They sent the pic to the actress and she freaked. This is what we are up against. They will do anything to stay in power. And then this was Starchild's final message. He says, "It would be great if the author of this thread could get the insider to just put his video proof on the internet. I don't get why they aren't simply replying anymore or giving us updates or something. All it would take to end this evil is for one person to come forward and do what is right. I'm beginning to think that I have just gotten my hopes up and there really isn't any proof. It would be hard to get people to believe what's been happening without seeing it for themselves. Getting a major media outlet to show the evidence to the public won't be easy either. Many of the major newspapers and TV stations are owned by the same evil people trying to cover all this up. The way I see it, the internet is the only way for the truth to be told, and me and many others are hoping beyond hope that it can be done with this thread." And so the question that people have always wondered is, well, who was Starchild? Who was this guy? And he gave a few clues about his identity, but it's really difficult to pin down who this could have been because he himself said that he was purposely sprinkling in incorrect info about himself in his posts because he feared that he'd be killed if it was known that he was the one who was posting all of this. And really, one of the first things I thought of when I saw this story about Rob Reiner's murder was wondering if his son could have been Starchild, because there are some similarities. And the first, most obvious one is the drug problems. the fact that Nick Reiner had what sounds like just an absolutely awful drug problem. And Starchild also talked about his problem with drugs, but obviously it's Hollywood, and obviously there are tons of kids out there who have drug problems. And Starchild also said that his dad had once been a big deal in Hollywood and was now not nearly as popular as he once was, and that's definitely true of Rob Reiner. He was a huge deal in the 1970s. He was one of the stars of All in the Family, and then he became a very successful director in the 80s and 90s. But by 2009, his career was pretty much irrelevant. He directed a few films, and almost all of them were just total box office bombs that no one has ever even heard of. He didn't really act anymore other than having a few guest roles. Really, the only time he ever made the news was because he was so outspoken politically. He was constantly ranting and raving about politics, but that's really all he's been known for the past 20 some years. So when Starchild mentions that his father was not nearly the star that he once was, that would definitely describe Rob Reiner. And it's also interesting how Starchild typed his posts because he claimed that he was in his 20s, so that wouldn't match up with Nick Reiner because he would have been about 16 back in 2009. But Starchild did say that he was sprinkling in disinformation into his posts, and the way he types really seems more like a teenager and how a teenager would type. He uses the number 2 instead of TO, uses the number 4 instead of FOR, just uses a whole bunch of shorthand and just awful punctuation and capitalization. So it really does seem like a teenager is the one who's posting these posts, and that would match up with Nick Reiner's age at the time. And another interesting thing has to do with the Reiner house. So obviously, Starchild talked about how there was a dungeon in his father's house where some just absolutely horrible things happened. And the house that the Reiners lived in has a really interesting history. It was originally built by Henry Fonda, and Henry Fonda definitely seems like the type of guy who would have a dungeon built into his basement because the Fonda family is up there with one of the most messed up families in all of Hollywood. And most know that Henry Fonda is the father of Peter Fonda and Jane Fonda and Bridget Fonda, and he himself was a big star back in the day, and he has quite the interesting background. His wife Frances was committed to a mental asylum, and she committed suicide by slicing open her throat in 1950. And Henry Fonda's first wife was Margaret Sullivan, and she too died under very unusual circumstances. She had also been committed to a mental asylum for a really long stretch during her life, and she was found dead at 50 years old in a hotel room. And a lot of people believe that this death was also a suicide, but she didn't leave a note, and so the official cause of death was just given as an accidental overdose of drugs. And Margaret Sullivan's daughter had also been committed to a mental asylum for a long stretch during her life, and she died just a few months after Margaret Sullivan. And then her son had also spent time in mental asylums, and he eventually committed suicide years later. So there's some really dark stuff here surrounding Henry Fonda, and Henry Fonda's kids also turned out to be just pretty much just wackos later in life. There's tons upon tons of articles out there about them that I won't really get into here, but that is a lot of people close to Henry Fonda dealing with mental issues, oftentimes very severe mental issues. It definitely does seem like this whole epidemic of really bad stuff surrounding him could stem from some sort of abuse or something even worse than that. And I found it interesting that Henry Fonda was the one who built the house that the Reiners lived in and where Nick Reiner murdered his parents. You do really wonder if there are some secrets in this house because, obviously, as I mentioned, one of the things Starchild talks a lot about is how his father had a dungeon in the basement of his house where a lot of the abuse occurred. And with this house being built by Henry Fonda and him being connected to just all these deaths and suicides and people with mental problems, you really do wonder if this house might have had some sort of dungeon in it or secret room that Henry Fonda had put in there. Now, we don't know if there was any kind of abuse like what Starchild talks about going on with Nick Reiner. It definitely would not surprise me, but information like that hasn't been released yet. I did find it interesting that this video surfaced after the murders. It's been posted on social media in a few places, and it's from a roast of Rob Reiner back in the early 2000s. And I won't play the video due to copyright, but you can find it on this page that I have listed here. And in the roast, Al Franken and Billy Crystal make some pretty inappropriate and definitely curious jokes. So, first up, Billy Crystal. During the roast, he said, What I love most about Rob is his deep, almost suspicious love for the kids. He freely gives them his time, his money, whatever it takes to get them into the van. And even more disturbingly, Al Franken told a pretty detailed joke about Rob Reiner being abused as a kid by his father, Carl. And he said on a typical night, Carl would slip into Rob's bed, roll him over, swab him down, and say something like, "I'm thinking about hiring Maury Amsterdam to play Buddy Sorrell. What do you think?" Well, the success of the Dick Van Dyke Show changed things dramatically. Carl started inviting many of his famous friends to blank his son. That list includes some of the greats in comedy: Paul Lynde, Dom DeLuise, Rip Taylor, Danny Kaye, Charles Nelson Riley, and Rock Hudson, who I don't think is that funny. And obviously, that's a pretty awful thing to joke about. If you didn't know, Rob Reiner's father, Carl, was majorly involved in Hollywood. He created the Dick Van Dyke Show and involved in just a ton of roles over the years. And a couple pictures of them are kind of disturbing, given what Al Franken said in this joke of his. There's a lot that's been written about how abuse and how it is usually generational, how people who were abused as children then go on to abuse their own kids. There's a lot out there about that. And like I said, we don't know for sure if anything like that was going on with this family, but it definitely would not surprise me. Because obviously it takes a lot to slit two people's throats. I mean, that is just unbelievably extreme. You really have to have just a ton of repressed anger towards someone to do something like that. That definitely to me seems like there has to be way more to this story than Nick Reiner just having some spur of the moment reaction while he was having an argument with his parents, even if he was like really hopped up on drugs. I mean, it takes a whole heck of a lot to slit two people's throats. And then I also did want to point out that Starchild did say that he was somewhat well known from acting. And back in 2009, Nick Reiner wasn't famous at all. He hadn't been involved in any movies or TV shows. So that obviously wouldn't add up with him being Starchild. But again, this could have been just one of the lies that he told to make it harder to identify him. So there's no like smoking gun that says Nick Reiner was Starchild, and one of the difficult things about it is that Nick Reiner was basically unknown until these murders happens. There's really not much older info or interviews out there with him. All people knew about him was that he had some mental problems. Even if he wasn't Starchild, the type of things that Starchild talked about really seem to be just so prevalent in Hollywood the more you kind of look into things like this. So even if he wasn't Starchild, you do wonder if all these problems that he had comes from the type of things that Starchild was talking about. But the interesting thing is Rob Reiner wasn't just some director in Hollywood. He's always been very involved in politics, like really high level politics. Most recently, he was on this committee to investigate Russia because they claimed that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election. And this committee was basically just like an all out assault to try to take down Donald Trump. And on this committee, Rob Reiner was working with a former director of national intelligence and three former CIA directors. So that is some serious power on this committee that just happens to also include Rob Reiner. So he was definitely way more than just some Hollywood director. He was majorly connected to some extremely powerful people. And then a final note on this Starchild mystery. I've always just been so interested in this whole mystery of Starchild's identity, and there was a ton of speculation about who Starchild could have been when this thread was first posted. Some people thought it might be Corey Feldman or Corey Haim. One interesting guess was Andrew Koenig, and he was most well known for playing Boner on Growing Pains. And he did have a famous father. His dad, Walter Koenig, was on the original Star Trek. And the reason people thought it could be Andrew Koenig was that Andrew Koenig, quote unquote, committed suicide right as this Starchild thread was popular. He hung himself from a tree in a park in Canada, and right after this suicide, Starchild never posted again. So it seemed like pretty suspicious timing. And actually, in my original video, a couple people in the comments mentioned that Starchild could be Chet Hanks, Tom Hanks' son. And this I thought was pretty interesting. Right around 2009 was when Chet Hanks just started to act himself, and so that would add up with Starchild saying that he'd just become known and that he had a famous father. And Chet Hanks also has a long history of substance abuse problems. And he also has a history of posting kind of like provocative things online. He made some posts where he talks about the Illuminati and these secret societies, claiming that he's either a part of it or he's trying to take it down. Some people think that he's just joking around in these. He also posted a couple messages during COVID where he said that COVID was basically the flu and he'd never get the vaccine. That caused a little bit of a stir. So he's definitely kind of posted some provocative things online, and he's definitely got some very interesting symbolism in his tattoos as well. But Starchild did say that his dad wasn't nearly as big of a star as he once was, and even back in 2009, that wasn't really true of Tom Hanks because he was a big star even back then. So that wouldn't add up with Chet Hanks being Starchild. But this whole identity and legitimacy of Starchild, it's a real interesting mystery to look into. And as I mentioned, there's nothing that's come out yet to indicate that there was any type of abuse going on with Nick Reiner. But between his really bad mental problems and drug problems, and just the really extreme way that he committed these murders, it definitely made me think of this Starchild thread when I saw the news about what had happened. So maybe there's something here, maybe there isn't. Definitely seemed to me like there was some red flags going on, but we'll see if more news comes out or if anything comes out during the trial. And then lastly, just wanted to give a big shout out to the members here on YouTube and the supporters on Patreon. Thank you so very much for your support. Really means a lot. I truly appreciate it. So thanks so much again. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon with another video.